it's time you thought about a more comfortable place for yourself. The sentence landed on the granite countertop, between my cup of coffee and a spoon bent with age. It shattered the silence I had lived in for the last few years. Behind them, on the fridge, were magnets, my grandson's practice schedule, and my grocery list, where the first item was batteries for his toy cars. There were two of them: my daughter, Claire, in her laceless sneakers, and her partner, in his ever present baseball cap. Maybe something smaller, more spacious for just you. We're all tired of walking on eggshells. On eggshells. They might as well have said, "Get out of the house," or "Shrink yourself, be quieter." I looked at them and thought, you're asking me to become smaller, but I'm already almost transparent. I was the one who had spent her whole life fixing what was broken: a cabinet door, someone's mood, someone else's debts. I paid for Claire's wellness studio, for the rent, for the orange diffusers, and $1,000 blenders. You always said we were a team, she'd say, and I'd cover another loss. But that day, standing between the refrigerator and the sugar bowl, I noticed for the first time how deafeningly the clock was ticking. And that's when I started numbering my silence. 7 blue stickers on 7 boxes. Each box cost me a night's sleep. I pressed the first sticker onto a box labeled dishes. Inside weren't plates, but my reading glasses, a small engraved silver spoon, and a note to myself: "Don't forget yourself." The second went on photographs. Beneath a stack of smiling children and diplomas, I hid a folded road map marked up with motels and small towns by the water. The third was for winter. It held hats and socks, just in case I found a place where the winters were milder than they had been recently. The fourth and fifth were given generic names: garden and linens, so the movers wouldn't laugh. The sixth box was the heaviest: papers. I filled it with tax returns, insurance policies, my will, and all the receipts from the times I had rescued my adult daughter from her latest adult decision. The seventh box was left empty, for air, for me. I didn't argue with them. 2 days later, I called a real estate agent someone at the pharmacy had recommended. A week later, a "for sale" sign appeared on the lawn. I looked at my house like a stage after the play is over. The curtain is up, the actors are gone, and only dust and the faint smell of fried onions hang in the air. All the important conversations had already been had, which is why there was nothing left to talk about. I took the keys, with their leaf-shaped keychain, out of the drawer and placed them on the granite countertop, flat, face up, like a one-way train ticket. In that moment, I realized the seventh box wasn't empty. I would pack it with a voice that would finally have a place. Suddenly, the stakes in this game were mine. Not the house, not the furniture, but my air. And if I had to leave to take a full breath, then I would leave. I am Evelyn Carter. I am 71 years old, and I am finally learning to write my own ending. Chapter 2. A clean break first. I went over the numbers, not the ones on my phone's calculator, the ones etched into muscle memory. The cost of Claire's monthly subscriptions for advertising, for trendy yoga mats, for a breathing app where a voice in your headphones teaches you how to breathe, also by subscription. A day's rent, a day of losses, a day of "we almost broke even." I took out a lined notebook, a green one from the supermarket where the checkout machine always wishes you a wonderful day, and wrote down every almost, line by line. The result was a ladder of debt that I had been climbing down for the last few years. Behind every number was an unspoken, "You understand." Shoes for my grandson, so he fits in. A vacation, so he doesn't feel left out. Insurance, just in case. On that ladder, I was the handrail they all held onto without looking down. But even handrails have supports. One of them was my house. I called an appraiser. He arrived in a gray jacket and politely asked to see the basement. The basement was cool and dry. It was home to the washing machine and boxes of my daughter's old toys. Or rather, my grandson's, who would play with them for 2 days before going back to his tablet. The appraiser praised the foundation and said the neighborhood was in demand. I nodded. The neighborhood had always been in demand while I was working and paying my property taxes on time. Claire didn't hear about the for sale sign from me. Her partner sent me a text. Seriously, what about us? I reread it and, for the first time, allowed myself a reply that didn't need an emoji. Us is me and my heir, I wrote, and hit send. An hour later, Claire called. She spoke quickly, like she always did at the end of the month. She was scared, but her fear was for me. How are you there alone? Where are you going? Not, what are we going to do about the business? Or, how will we pay the debts? She asked, how are you? It was too late, of course, but her voice was my first small reward. A buyer appeared after 2 showings, a young couple with a child whose college fund they were already saving for. I looked at them and saw my husband and me when we had first moved in. Their eyes were shining, and they fell in love with the house with the flick of a light switch in the entryway. I signed the papers with a steady hand. The numbers landed in my account. Not huge, not a fairy tale amount, but enough to build a new ladder, one that went up. Letting go of the house was easier than letting go of the habit. That same day, I closed the credit card that was used just in case by someone other than me. That evening, I took out a suitcase and packed the most important things. That same roadmap, my glasses, the note that said, "Don't forget yourself." I left a note for the new owners on the doorknob. You can sleep well here, as long as you don't leave the TV on all night. I didn't sleep that night. I listened to the hum of the distant highway, the clatter of the garbage truck at midnight, the slam of a neighbor's car door. It was all the background noise of a city I had lived in for so long that I'd learned to tell the seasons by their smell. Spring smelled of earth, summer of hot asphalt, autumn of leaves and wet dogs, winter of radiators and cinnamon. I was saying goodbye to that smell, and I understood that I wasn't leaving a place. I was leaving a role I no longer played. In the morning, I put an 8th sticker on my suitcase. It said, "On my way." The road greeted me with the familiar click of a seatbelt and a map on the screen, where the thin blue veins of the highways stretched south. I kept a paper map in the glove compartment, and sometimes I would spread it across my knees at a roadside coffee shop just to trace the printed lines with my finger, like in geography class as a child. I wasn't chasing landscapes. I was chasing a silence you could hear. The silence rode with me in the car, sat beside me when I stopped in a supermarket parking lot with its endless 80s music and a long line of checkout counters. The silence settled along my back as I pulled a water bottle from the motel fridge and opened the blinds just enough to see the lights of a distant intersection. I saw the same signs over and over, like a broken record. Car washes, hair salons, bars with neon signs, and happy hour from 5 to 7. At every exit, there were signs for lakes, state parks, resorts where kids threw bread to ducks. I thought about how I had spent my whole life buying bread for others, and now I wanted to learn how to bake it for myself. At the end of the third day, I saw the water, not the ocean, a bay as calm as heavy fabric on a windless day. The waterfront was short, with a wooden boardwalk where dogs ran in the morning and teenagers skateboarded in the evening. It smelled of salt, boat fuel, and fried fish from a snack bar on the corner, where kids paid for lemonade with sandy coins. I realized I could stay here for a week, or a season, or for however long it took for my air to stop choking on memories. I rented a small apartment on the top floor of a building where the elevator doors always paused before closing, as if giving you a chance to change your mind. On the balcony was a plastic chair with a view of boat masts and a lighthouse beam. At night, I could hear foghorns and the cry of gulls, and during the day, the voices of people who live as if tomorrow is just another day. Downstairs, across the street, was a cafe that served coffee in thick white mugs, where women my age talked about the weather and the price of berries. And no one asked anyone for one more month. That first evening, I laid out my papers on the table. In one column, all the expenses I had used to build someone else's ladder. In the other, my new expenses: rent, food, gas, and unexpected pleasures, like fresh flowers and tickets to a local concert. For the first time in years, I added a line item: reserve, for myself. Not for a sudden family emergency, but for a sudden joy for me. The phone stayed silent until noon the next day, and it was a blessing. Then a text from Claire arrived. "We're worried. Where are you? We need to talk about the studio's bills." I looked at the water. It reflected the clouds like numbers in a spreadsheet. "I'm by the water, Claire," I wrote. "The studio's bills aren't mine." And I added a period. Her reply came as a long voice message, full of accumulated anxiety, empty threats, and unexpected tenderness. I didn't listen to it right away. I walked down to the boardwalk and bought myself fried fish wrapped in paper. The oil dripped down my fingers, and I laughed to myself, quietly, so I wouldn't startle a seagull waiting for its share. I didn't know how long I could last in this silence, but I had 7 boxes and one empty shelf inside me, where I could finally place myself. I started another notebook, a thick one, with a hardcover and a small pocket for miscellaneous things. In it, I didn't write down numbers, but myself. Today, I woke up without an alarm and didn't listen to anyone else's plans. Today, I watched a little boy learn how to catch a ball at the water's edge, and I thought that I need to get my own coordination back. Today, I bought a packet of basil seeds and put a plastic cup on the windowsill. I started each entry with the date and offered no judgment. No good job, no you should have. It was the notebook of a witness, a testimony that days exist even if I'm not proving anything to anyone in them. Downstairs, in the building across the street, was a little shop with a sign that read, "A little bit of everything." It sold rope, buckets, fishing hooks, lighthouse magnets, and postcards with historic photos of the pier. The owner always greeted me like we'd known each other for 100 years and always offered my change with a piece of candy. I bought a striped blanket and a small flashlight from him. In the evenings, the flashlight beam drew patterns on the walls, and I'd catch myself smiling at the empty room. During the day, I walked everywhere, to the grocer with his brown paper bags, to the library that smelled of dust and plastic book covers, to the Saturday market where the vendors smiled at every customer as if they were a neighbor. I would come home and write in my notebook. Today, I didn't feel guilty for buying myself strawberries. Claire kept texting. Her messages more and more often began with the word, "We need." I replied less frequently, but more honestly. Need is a word that sticks easily to someone else's life. It approaches your own with caution. I continued with my own needs: to sleep well, to eat, to walk, to not lie to myself. One evening, I heard music from the small square by the pier. A group of teenagers with guitars, and a girl with a voice that sounded like salt on her lips. People gathered in a half circle, dropping change into an open guitar case, the kind of change I used to collect in a jar for a rainy day. I took a bill from my wallet, placed it on top, and went home. In my notebook, I wrote, "Today, I put money into music, not into a hole." Around the same time, my grandson texted me, "Grandma, where are you?" I called him. We talked about school, his dog, and a game where he builds cities. I told him I was learning to build my own. "Send me a pic," he said. I went out onto the balcony, took a photo of the boat masts against a pink sky, and sent it. A minute later, his reply came, "Cool." One word, but it held more support than all the adults' needs. The thick notebook was getting fuller. Tucked between its pages were tickets, notes with recipes, and pages in other people's handwriting. A woman at the market had explained how to pan fry corn. So it's almost, but not quite, like it's grilled. I realized that I wanted to cook, to fry, to bake, not to have guests over or keep up traditions, but to add an aroma to the air that would be mine alone. At the end of the month, I opened the sixth box, the one marked Papers, and moved the documents that no longer had power over my days into it. I added a note on top. These papers don't control me anymore. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel defiant, just accurate. The letter came by regular mail, a white envelope, slightly damp at the edges, as if it had been held in someone's hands for too long. Inside was an official tone and familiar words: obligations, deadlines, responsibility. A lawyer, hired by Claire and her business partner, informed me that I was intentionally hindering the stability of their business by withdrawing from the previously established model of support. What a strange phrase, a model of support. As if I were a free drink dispenser, where you just had to hold out your hand and the water would pour itself. I left the letter on the table and went to wash a mug. The water ran, like summer rain on a porch. Then I came back, picked up my thick notebook, and wrote, "Today, they are trying to put me back in my old role using a legal tone." I'm not a lawyer. I'm a 71-year-old woman who has spent her entire adult life paying for other people's almost. But I know how to read and how to ask questions, and also how to make a phone call. I called an acquaintance from the library, a woman with short hair and funny glasses who runs a club called Legal Basics for Everyone. She advised me to go to a free legal clinic. There, in a room with a gray carpet and cups of water, they explained something simple. If I hadn't signed any contracts for eternal support, then I legally owed no one anything. There were obligations, moral, habitual, familial, but they weren't written down on paper. I nodded, thinking that my strongest obligation was, finally, not to abandon myself. I replied to the letter briefly, the way they teach you to respond to spam. I am not an investor or a partner and have signed no agreements. Please do not bother me with legal correspondence on this matter. And I added a period. Claire called that evening. Her voice was a mix of everything: anger, resentment, pleading. I listened. I didn't argue. I repeated one phrase: I can't and I won't. She asked, "Why have you become like this?" "I was always like this," I answered. "You just never noticed." And I hung up. After the call, for the first time in a long time, I cried. Not from guilt, from relief. The tears came out like salt leaving the body. I opened the window, and the damp sea air filled the room, carrying not a single "we need." I covered the letter with a striped blanket, the way you cover unnecessary things before a renovation, and I went to the kitchen to roast corn, using the recipe from the market. Later that evening, a text came from my grandson. "Love you, Grandma." I replied, "I love you too." And I wrote in my notebook, "Today I am loved by someone who needs nothing from me but this." In the fall, the sea turned black, and the wind blew so hard that only experience could keep a hat on your head. They installed wooden barriers along the boardwalk, temporary railings, so the winter waves wouldn't carry anyone away. I stood there, holding on to them, and thought about my own railings, the ones that hadn't served me for years. They weren't broken because someone had cut them. They had rotted because I had let too many hands rest on them. At the "a little bit of everything" shop, the thermal mugs went on sale. "It's going to be a harsh winter," the owner said, and winked as if he knew I'd get through it. I bought a mug and walked home, curling my fingers to keep them warm. The wind snuck up my sleeves and nipped at my nose, and I laughed at how alive it all felt. Claire stopped texting for a week. Too much quiet is also a sound. I held on to my new routine: a short walk in the morning, the library or the market in the afternoon, a blanket and books in the evening. At times, a wave of doubt would wash over me. What have I done? Where am I going? Is it too late to learn to live for myself? I would write these questions in my notebook and leave them unanswered until morning. In the morning, the answers would come on their own. No, to a place where I can breathe. It's not too late. In early November, a text arrived. "We're closing the studio. We need help paying the employees." I felt the old reflex stir inside me: to take charge, to apologize for not helping sooner, to open my wallet again and solve the problem. I put the kettle on, poured hot water into my thermal mug, and sat by the window, watching people stride by, leaning forward against the wind. I didn't reply. I breathed. An hour later, another message came. "We're sorry. We'll handle it." I put the phone down and cried in a different way, because the railing had held. I walked down to the water and saw workers replacing the boardwalk planks, the rotten ones for new, sturdy ones. I watched the simple work and thought, that's what I need to do. Not mourn the old if it gives way under my feet. For too long, I had clung to the role of the reliable one, because I was afraid that without me, everything would fall apart. But when I let go, this is what happened. Everything started to become what it truly was. The weak things fell. The strong things grew stronger. People showed their true selves. That evening, my downstairs neighbor called. Her washing machine was broken, and she asked if she could use mine. I agreed. We drank tea in the kitchen while the machine hummed and talked about simple things: cats, the weather, how the shop had run out of striped blankets. "You're brave," she said. "I'm tired," I replied. She smiled. Sometimes that's almost the same thing. We laughed. I wrote, "Today I allowed myself to help in a different way, by giving water, not just money. Winter on the water is a special kind of music. The ice doesn't freeze solid, but it creaks like an old rocking chair. The shop started selling pine-scented candles, and I bought one. Not for the holidays, not for gas, but just because. In my notebook, I started a new section. Firsts. For the first time, I bought myself good shoes, not on sale. For the first time, I didn't call back in response to a criticism. For the first time, I went to bed when I wanted to, not when everyone else did. I also wrote down bigger things. For the first time, I read a novel in 3 nights without getting distracted by family chats. For the first time, I skipped a holiday celebration without feeling like I had to give everyone the same amount of joy. For the first time, I woke up and couldn't remember who I had promised to help. Claire didn't call. Sometimes she would send pictures of my grandson in an apron at art class, in a funny hat with a pom-pom, a note saying, "Got an A on his project?" I'd reply with a heart emoji and the words, "So proud." And I really was. Not because of the grade, but because he is growing up in a world where my love is finally not measured in dollars. In January, I signed up for a pottery class in a small studio on the outskirts of town that smelled of clay and warm dust. Shaping something with your hands that will become a mug. That is a meditation that doesn't require an app. My first mugs were crooked, but they held my tea and my thoughts perfectly. On one, I scratched the word air with a needle and fired it. Now I had a mug for my mornings. I would take it out to the balcony and watch the gloomy clouds drift by, and then part. A new entry appeared in the first section. For the first time, I gifted myself a workshop of silence. I knew it sounded like a greeting card, but it didn't matter. A greeting card is also a letter to oneself. At the end of the month, Claire called. She said she had found a job. Not a dream job, not her own business, just a job. "It's a start," she said. Her voice had less gloss, more air. I wished her luck. After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't the silence of loneliness, but of scale, as if the room had gotten bigger. In the spring, I ran my hand over the leaf-shaped keychain and realized I no longer wanted to carry it in my purse without any keys. I hung it on a small nail by the entrance, like a little charm. My home was somewhere else now, in my body, in my notebook, in the routine that holds you better than any alarm system. I gathered the 7 boxes and opened the empty one last. Inside, I placed the things that had seemed sentimental, but, on closer inspection, turned out to be heavy. Letters thanking me for things I hadn't wanted to do. Best mom cards received in the years when I was single-handedly signing for a loan for someone else's business. A photograph where I'm smiling as if I'm holding a neon sign on my shoulders. I closed the lid and wrote on the sticker, "The past without resentment." Down on the boardwalk, the fair season began. Children ran between the stalls. Men argued about fishing gear. Women chose strawberries. I bought myself 2 bouquets, daisies and wild tulips. I put them in my crooked mugs. At the market, they were baking blueberry pies, and I stood in line like everyone else, not telling anyone how I was keeping others afloat. This silence felt like a celebration. No one organized it, it just happened. That evening, I found an old recording on my phone. Voices stay if you don't delete them. There were the 3 of us, me, Claire, and the boy, walking down an alley, rustling the leaves. I was laughing. It wasn't a forced laugh, not a rescuing one, but a real one. I put the recording on repeat and fell asleep to the sound of my own voice. In the morning, I wrote, I was alive before, and I am now too. At the end of April, a letter from the bank arrived, confirmation of the final mortgage payment, which I had paid off with the money from the house sale and my savings. The lines were straight, the seal was crisp. I placed the letter between the pages of my notebook under the letter A, air, after, arrival, and I smiled. My house now fits on a single page, but its grounds are the horizon. In the summer, the water became almost transparent, and in the shallows, you could see the sand with birds' footprints. I walked there in the mornings, barefoot, to remember what my feet felt like. At the pottery studio, I started to get the hang of making plates, shallow, with uneven edges. I gave one to my neighbor, the one who had done her laundry at my place in the fall, and she brought me a pie in return. We sat on the balcony, eating the pie from my plate, and talked about how the important thing isn't the perfection of the circle, but what you put in it. Claire came to visit for a weekend, for the first time, not on business or to talk about something important, but just to visit. She brought my grandson and a bag of beach towels. We walked along the boardwalk on the new planks they had reinforced that winter, and she said, You seem peaceful. I have a place to live, I replied. She nodded, and we were quiet. A good quiet, the kind that holds no unasked questions. That evening, after the boy had fallen asleep on the couch under the blanket, Claire said, I found a real job. It's not easy, but the pay is steady. I don't want to go back to how things were. And thank you for saying no. She was looking away, the way people do when they say something difficult. I said, Thank you for understanding. We hugged, not like drowning people, but like people who no longer need to share the same air to breathe. I walked them to their car. The breeze carried the smell of fried fish and sunscreen. Musicians were playing on the corner, their guitar case full of change. I dropped in another bill, one of the ones I now always keep in the pocket of my hardcover notebook. On my way back, I stopped by the A Little Bit of Everything shop. The owner was carrying out a box with a sign that said, Sale on lighthouses. I bought a small ceramic lighthouse, white, with a red roof. I put it on the windowsill at home, between my two mugs. An ending isn't a period. It's the right to take a breath instead. I put on a new sticker. A new chapter appeared in my notebook, one without a title. It doesn't have lists of who I owe. It has roots, the path to the water, the road to the market, the stairs to the top floor, where the elevator closes its doors slowly, as if giving someone else time to catch it. Sometimes that someone else is still the old me. I make it in time. I step inside, and I tell her, I'm here. She nods, and we walk together. I didn't move to a country where there's no winter. I moved into a life where winter has meaning. And when I hear the distant horn of a boat motor at night, I reach out my hand, feel for the ceramic lighthouse on the windowsill, and understand silence isn't emptiness. It's the place where I am waited for.